Welcome to Crossroads. A young Scottish girl, 12 years old, brandishing a knife and a hatchet. She's gone viral. And she's also become the poster image of the whole crime problem now sweeping across Europe. Also, President Donald Trump has now moved forward to create the Domestic Military Quick Reaction Force, which they talked about. This confirms earlier reports that this could be in place. It is now here. And also in other news, a suspect in an armed carjacking reveals on camera how he keeps getting released back on the streets with the exact same charges. We're discussing these topics and a lot more today. So don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Now look, first off, there have been ongoing protests in the UK. A lot of these are against the mass migration, really big grassroots movement happening there right now. And right amidst all of this, a young girl in Scotland, she's become the global poster image of this entire movement. A video of her, and I believe it's her sister, 14-year-old girl with her, saying, "Don't touch her, don't touch her." She's only 12 years old, yelling at individuals, chasing them around with a camera. Allegedly, they were being followed and harassed by a group of migrant men. And one of the young girls brandishes a knife and a hatchet. And when the police came, because they called the police saying, "Hey, these migrant men are following us, harassing us," the girls were obviously very scared. You can tell by their voices, yelling, "Don't touch her, don't touch her." The police arrested the little girl. And this has sparked an outcry even right here in the United States. Now, it seems on the UK side, most focus is on the girl having weapons because in the UK, that's very controversial. So the girl, just to clarify, 14 years old and with her sister. Courier UK says this: a 14-year-old girl has been charged after allegedly being caught with a bladed weapon in Dundee. It says police were called to St. Anne Lane, just off Cooper Angus Road in Lochee, shortly after 7:30 p.m. on Saturday. It followed reports of a girl having a bladed weapon. Now look, in the United Kingdom, it is very controversial to have bladed weapons. They don't have guns there, at least most people don't. Even the police don't carry guns for the most part. But carrying a knife, even a cooking knife, even there was a guy arrested for carrying around like pruning shears for his garden. They're very strict with these things. And so, of course, in the UK, this is becoming a big issue. But outside the United Kingdom, and especially right here in the United States, the focus is not on the fact that the little girl had a knife. The focus instead has been the problem of girls being raped by migrants in Europe in light of a recent case as well where a 17-year-old girl was raped and then murdered in the Netherlands. The girl in that case, she called the police while riding her bike at nighttime. She said she was being followed by a man on a bicycle. While she was on the call, there were sounds suggesting she was being attacked while on the call with the police. And the suspect in that case is a 22-year-old man from Nigeria who is seeking asylum in Europe and was also accused of raping another woman just a few days before that and then let out somehow. And again, possibly led to another crime. So in light of that, well, the image of this little girl in the UK brandishing these weapons, she's become kind of a symbol of girls feeling they need to fend for themselves. And a lot of influencers in the United States are saying, where are the men of Europe to defend these girls? Why do the girls have to carry around bladed weapons, quote unquote, risking arrest because they're afraid of getting raped and murdered? DC Drano said this. It says the UK is experiencing record numbers of migrant rapes, and the police barely help teenage girls, have resorted to defending themselves from being assaulted. And what do the police do? They arrested the girls trying to not be raped. The UK has fallen to dystopian levels of evil. Now, Elon Musk has also come out as a very loud voice on this. Elon Musk said this. He said, "I would like to help fund legal actions against corrupt officials who aided and abetted the rape of Britain." And he's pointing to numbers, of course, on the number of rapes there. He says, per the official government inquiry, he said, "Please reply below for consideration," meaning he's looking to represent the people of Europe or the people of UK in light of the epidemic of rapes. Elon Musk also responded by posting an image of the Union Jack flag for the United Kingdom, which has become an anti-mass migration symbol in a new type of protest now spreading across the country. A very controversial image is spread right now. even though in the United Kingdom it is legal to show your flag. And because political speech is oftentimes not legal there, people are being arrested for praying in their minds. People are being arrested for posting things on the internet against mass migration. People are going to jail for that. And so what people are doing instead is using the legal display of their flag as the symbol of protest. And of course, it's interesting because technically they can do it, but some are arguing that that is also a type of quote-unquote hate speech. Now, Elon Musk also pointed to the spike in rape crime reports, which skyrocketed in many parts of Europe over the past couple decades. Notably, you can see UK, Germany, France, a lot of other countries gotten really bad, while countries like Poland and a few others that do not allow many migrants in stayed relatively the same. And people are wondering, well, what changed in the countries that have these spikes in crime and these spikes in rapes? Now, on the point of the young girl brandishing the knife and the hatchet, she's also become a meme. She's become really a poster image, right? And this image has gone global, especially here in the United States. It's getting the attention, notably, of many conservative influencers. And the image of her is being framed along with a narrative. Why does a young girl have to defend herself? Why are the men of Europe not defending their young girls? And on that point as well, again, it's very controversial in Europe. It's a big issue with them. Even when there were reports here in the United States talking about, there was a second-generation immigrant who went on a stabbing and murder spree of a young girl's dance studio, which triggered, of course, riots in the UK. The UK police were threatening to arrest Americans for talking about it. They were saying that they were inciting riots in the United Kingdom. They were saying they were going to extradite Americans to stand trial in the UK. And of course, in the UK, this has led to other things where you could say it has led to a rise of racism. And there are people, of course, going a bit too far with it. But again, it's causing a lot of tensions there. Which side is right? Which side is wrong? Now, on another point with this, though, the idea of self-defense and the right to self-defense is very different here in the United States than it is in most countries. In the United States, of course, it is really deemed a God-given right that people should be able to defend themselves. We're allowed to have firearms here, for the most part, depending on which state you're in. And of course, the idea of this is that, well, God gives creatures the ability of self-defense. Cats have claws, dogs have teeth, even bugs have stingers and fangs and everything else. Now, humans, we've created external means to defend ourselves, mostly the police. But the question rises of, well, what happens when the police do not protect certain members of the community, when there are large-scale crimes being committed? And even worse, what happens when the crimes are being committed by a group of people being protected by the police at the cost of the victim? Now, is that happening in the UK? Is that happening elsewhere? Some people believe it is. There are arguments on both sides. But this is becoming a very prominent debate, now boiling to the surface. And again, we'll see where it goes. Now, in other news, President Donald Trump has now moved forward to create a domestic military quick reaction force. Speaking of actions to, again, fix the policing problems, where police are sometimes not allowed to do their jobs. But this confirms earlier reports that this could soon be in place. Trump has now done it. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers. Support us and independent journalism by hitting that like button, leave a comment below, and thank you so much for watching. Quick note, just reading the comments about that young girl feeling she needs to defend herself. I have a 15-year-old daughter right here in the United States. She knows gun safety, she knows how to use a pistol, she knows how to use a rifle. I also got her classes in knife fighting, Filipino martial arts, eskrima, again, dual blade fighting. So I very much believe that it is a God-given right to be able to defend yourself, including little girls. And of course, my daughter has a lot of confidence because she knows how to defend herself, including using firearms and, knife fighting. Of course, laws are different in different countries. In Europe, some people might be terrified to hear that, but here in America, it's different. Now, look, back to the stories, though. In other news, a National Guard Quick Reaction Force has now been officially created. This was announced by the White House after President Donald Trump signed an executive order to expand his anti-crime initiatives in Washington, D.C. The White House said this in a fact sheet. It said today, President Donald J. Trump signed an executive order directing additional specific actions to further, it says, crack down on crime in Washington, D.C. The order instructs the National Park Service to hire additional United States Park Police officers to support public safety in Washington, D.C. It directs the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia to hire additional prosecutors to focus on violence and property crimes. It establishes an online portal for Americans with law enforcement experience or other relevant backgrounds to join federal law enforcement branches to support law enforcement operations in Washington, D.C. Maybe if you're a veteran or if you've worked in security or you're a retired police officer. It says as well, it instructs law enforcement agencies that are members of the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, the one that Trump created, to create and begin training, manning, hiring, and equipping specialized units that are dedicated to ensuring public safety and order in the nation's capital that can be deployed whenever circumstances necessitate. Interesting point on that. In my opinion, if they're going to create special units because they need to create them, hire for them, then organize them, then deploy them, the time frame for that I would assume would be probably longer than a month. This does suggest the Trump administration is planning to extend the federalization of Washington, D.C. beyond the month time frame. It might be that Trump needs to get Congress to vote and approve this to go beyond the 1 month takeover. That's going to be hard because this is a deeply partisan issue. Democrats in particular have been very much against what Trump is doing. Republicans more in support of it. Trump would need about 6 to 8 Democrats to switch sides on the vote and vote to pass it. Can he get that? Maybe, maybe not. On Trump's side, he's leveraging a threat to kind of incentivize that, let's say. Trump is saying that if they do not pass this, he's going to make an emergency declaration and do it anyway. And the emergency declaration would actually give him probably even more power. Whereas if it goes through the legislative branch, Congress, they can actually put in the bill that goes through some of the stipulations they want. Democrats can have more of a say in it. Is it more in their favor or not, right? But back to what's happening. The White House says the order also directs the Secretary of Defense to create a specialized D.C. National Guard unit, the one we've been talking about, trained to ensure public safety and order in the nation's capital when its activation becomes necessary, and ensure state National Guards are similarly trained and ready to assist in quelling civil disturbances nationwide. So on that point, this is important. They're going to create and train a force of the National Guard for security operations in response to incidents in Washington, D.C. but they're going to use the model for that and create a very similar one for the entire country. And interestingly, they say it's going to be in place to, quote unquote, quell civil disturbances. Quell civil disturbances, what does that mean? I would assume that means not just law enforcement. I would assume this is more like an anti-riot deployment force. So if you have large-scale protests like what you had in Los Angeles, challenging ICE and so on, the National Guard deployed just like they did in Los Angeles, that could be a nationwide type thing. And interestingly, what the Trump administration is doing, they're ordering the Department of Defense to actually make trainings for this, have a more organized force that will probably be more effective in how they do this. It adds this: further, the Secretary of Defense will ensure the availability of a National Guard Quick Reaction Force for rapid nationwide deployment when circumstances warrant. In my interpretation, I think they're doing this with the possible, let's say, discretion that there could be mass movements, protests, and riots leading up to the midterm elections. I'd say that's a fair assessment because we've seen that happen in basically every major U.S. election for the past 10 years. During every major U.S. election, there have been large-scale protests, many of which have turned into riots. A lot of that was the BLM, or, quote-unquote, Black Lives Matter protests, which turned into the burning down of buildings, murders, lootings, riots, and so on. Fiery but mostly peaceful, as some would call them. You also had, of course, Antifa coming out, attacking people, also engaging in rioting. Some people accused Trump of doing this during the 2020 elections of January 6th. But the point is, they are creating, and remember, on this point, Trump did actually allow for the Department of Defense to deploy the National Guard that day. Trump did want to deploy the National Guard for January 6th. The deployment was not accepted, but Trump did want that. And so on the point of deploying the National Guard and having it prepared to put down riots and protests, you could argue that Trump even wanted to do that for January 6th. Now he's doing it for the entire country. Now it says this as well. The order directs the Department of Housing and Urban Development as well to investigate any non-compliance with crime prevention and safety requirements in HUD's agreement with the D.C. Housing Authority or landlords in vouchers to ensure that housing providers are ensuring safe, decent, and sanitary conditions in housing, and it says restricting tenants who engage in criminal activity like drug distribution, violent criminal activity, and domestic violence. So anybody who's on government housing, well, if you're engaging in drug distribution, violent criminal activity, and domestic violence, you might go to jail. And the housing authorities in Washington, D.C. actually are now required to monitor for it and probably report it. I would assume the way that will take place, they'll probably put up video cameras. They're probably going to have additional reporting mechanisms if people who are tenants say, hey, there's a drug dealer sitting outside every single day. Hey, there's a gang operating out of the building, and they can report it. Now, it also notes it tasks the Secretary of Transportation with conducting inspections to address unsafe conditions in D.C.'s federally funded transit systems, services, and take remedial action as needed. I can say D.C.'s subways are much better than New York's, much nicer on the inside as well. But it's not a big deal, of course, to make some additional moves to secure that as well. It says, finally, the order directs the Attorney General to request additional updates and modifications to the Metropolitan Police Department general orders from the mayor as necessary to address crime emergency and ensure public safety. And that's important, too, because the Attorney General, right, Jeanine Pirro, formerly with Fox News, she's more in line with Trump, whereas the local officials are not, just to be blunt, right? And so what this does is it takes some power out of the hands of the local authorities in terms of law enforcement, puts more authority in the hands of the Attorney General, which by extension is, more in favor, I wouldn't say under him necessarily, but more in line, let's say, with Trump's policies. So this does give the conservative side of American politics a lot more latitude and a lot more power over what's happening in Washington, D.C. when it comes to law enforcement. On that point also, Donald Trump is raising questions over whether crime data has been manipulated. This has been an ongoing discussion in the United States. Republicans are saying, look, in Washington, D.C., they've been messing with the crime numbers. Many Democrats on the other side and a lot of the media are saying that, well, the crime numbers, based on what they are on the surface, do not support Donald Trump's narrative, which he has used to necessitate the deployment of the National Guard or to federalize Washington, D.C. I will note, as of a couple months ago, most of the major media were in fact reporting that, yes, in fact, the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. were misreporting crime statistics. This was not a partisan issue even a couple months ago. Most major media reported this. It's interesting they're trying to sweep it all under the rug right now and make this a partisan issue. It was not a partisan issue as of a couple months ago. Most of the media, regardless of political leanings, were reporting this. But Donald Trump now is taking it a step further. They're now investigating this, and Donald Trump, during a White House press conference, called on the Chief of Staff for Policy, this is Stephen Miller, to explain something pretty shocking. Apparently, not only has crime been underreported, they say in some cases, homicides, murders, were being mislabeled as accidents. Watch this.
No police officer working in the city can remember a time in their lives when there has been no murders. You can work at the police department for 20 years, 30 years, your whole life. We've checked the records. No one can even find a record of being murder-free for as long as we've been murder-free under President Trump's leadership. Additionally, and the President spoke about this before, we've uncovered, in the process of uncovering, a massive scandal in Washington, D.C. with the doctoring of crime stats. And the Department of Justice, under the Attorney General, is leading the effort to uncover this. But when we ultimately share the results, it will stun you. The extent to which, even though D.C. had the worst crime in America, honestly measured, it dramatically understated how bad it was. There's even accusations that murders and homicides were reported as accidents instead of murders. I mean, this is how severe the manipulation of the crime data has been in the city, and it will all be uncovered and it will all be brought to light. You know, I've had a chance to spend some time, as does everyone here, with the police officers in the city. Members of the public are going up to them and thanking them, just overflowing with gratitude, because for the first time in their lives, they can use the parks, they can walk on the streets. You have people who can walk freely at night without having to worry about being robbed or mugged or wearing their watch.
Now, on the point of the whole crackdown on crime in the D.C. area, the federalization of Washington, D.C., it's putting a huge dent on crime. A lot is happening right now. And one of the big questions right now is, well, are the numbers on crime accurate? Were crimes being mislabeled or just unreported? What's the actual state of this? Are people being arrested and then just let go? How do you have murders labeled as, accidents? Oh, he accidentally fell on 3 bullets, officer. What a tragedy. No, don't look any further, right? He fell on the knife 20 times, officer. It was a true tragedy. Well, we're actually getting some more information on what this actually looks like. What happens when people are arrested for really serious crimes and people from their own mouths saying that, hey, I was let go. A suspect in a carjacking, an armed carjacking, had something interesting to say to Fox News about this. Basically, he says he's been arrested like this many times, and he even argues while being arrested, why are you arresting me? It is pointless because I'm just going to get set free again. Watch.
One man wanted in connection with an armed carjacking in Maryland told us that, why are you sending me back to jail? I won't even be there very long.
The judge is literally going to say we're going to put him on a 3-day hold. Then once the 3-day hold is up, and around who never shows up. I done been over DC jail 6 times for the same warrant. They never show up. DC jail has to release me. They release me. It's the same thing every time. The same thing every time.
Now look, I've seen this personally. I know people who've experienced this. I know people who've been deeply victimized by the crime in Washington, D.C., New York as well, actually, including several of my colleagues. In New York City, one of my colleagues was stabbed in the neck by an individual with a broken bottle. Survived, but crazy stuff. I have other colleagues who've been attacked. Same thing in Washington, D.C. In fact, one of our White House correspondents with NTD, sister media of Epoch Times, this is Iris Tao. She was even asked by Donald Trump during a cabinet meeting yesterday to explain her own experience because she was attacked personally in Washington, D.C. a couple years back. Watch this.
And I want to mention, about crime because we have a young lady here, Iris, of Epoch Times. You're Iris, aren't you, huh? Yes. And I heard you were very savagely mugged in the city, and I'm not going to let that happen under this administration. That was last year. And would you like to mention what happened?
Of course. So first of all, thank you, Mr. President.
Do you want to listen to this?
For having me here to share my story to the room and to the broader public. My name is Iris Tao. I'm a White House correspondent for NTD, the sister media of the Epoch Times. So more than 2 years ago, it was a Saturday morning in broad daylight. I was on my way to work, and a young man with a black ski mask pointed a gun at my face and threatened me to hand over my phone, my wallet, my laptop, and everything else. And when I refused, he used the butt of his handgun to strike me across the face, in the cheek, or what some people call pistol whip me, before running away. And that has deeply traumatized myself and my family. Ever since, I've never dared to walk in the street of DC at night, ever. And my family was extremely worried. So, Mr. President, thank you so much for what you're doing right now, because
you're being honest.
Such incidents involved not just me, but also my family. If he had shot me, I could have died right there in the middle of nowhere without my families or my friends knowing at the age of back then, I think 23. Right. Just starting my career here in DC without even starting a family. But now I'm very blessed to have this opportunity to...
So you had a gun pointed at your head, and you probably figured that he's going to pull the trigger because these are animals that don't know what the hell, they couldn't care less. Mm-hmm. The pulling the trigger to him is a very minor event, and I'm sure he's done it before. So how did you, and you did refuse to give it, which would probably, maybe somebody would say that was not the right decision, right? Right. But you refused, but I understand that. So, and then he hit you real hard.
Yes.
It's really amazing.
In other news, President Donald Trump has been removing many key leaders of the Federal Reserve, the Fed. And the latest has been his firing of Lisa Cook, who was on the Fed's Board of Governors. Donald Trump wrote in a letter, quote, "Pursuant to my authority under Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States and the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, as amended, you are hereby removed from your position on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve effective immediately." Now, she's challenging it, but as grounds for this, Trump noted that Cook is being investigated for mortgage fraud. Important to note, innocent until proven guilty. Ongoing investigations. She's challenging this, of course, which I'll mention in a bit. But Donald Trump wrote this. He says, "There is sufficient reason to believe you may have made false statements on one or more mortgage agreements. For example, as detailed in the criminal referral, you signed one document attesting that a property in Michigan would be your primary residence for the next year. 2 weeks later, you signed another document for a property in Georgia, stating that it would be your primary residence for the next year." And Trump is noting, you can't live in both places. Which one is it? Now, Attorney Mike Davis said this. He said, if the President of the United States does not have the Article 2 power to remove any Federal Reserve governor at any time for any reason, then the Federal Reserve structure is unconstitutional. Because the Federal Reserve, it's kind of a funny business, let's say. It's not quite federal. It's not actually a reserve. It's more like a private organization, a business in some regards. It is allowed to print money and set interest rates and is not entirely under federal control. Part of the thinking with that is that you don't want a president coming in, messing with the country's entire financial system, making it good for themselves, but then blowing it up for the next president, or putting things in place that might make the economy good for the next 4 to 8 years, but make it terrible after that. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be non-political. You don't want to have political, quote-unquote, gerrymandering going on. The accusation from Trump's side is that he believes it is political. He believes that they're messing with interest rates to make his economy not as good as it could be, while his political enemies, let's say, they've done the opposite. They've kept interest rates at like 0% many times, and made it very different on the other side. So people experience a better economy when one side is in office, a worse economy when it's Trump, frankly. Is that the case? Is this just them preparing for actual financial problems? They argue on both sides. Now, on the point of Cook, she's arguing that President Donald Trump does not have the legal authority to remove her from her position. She's arguing the president should not be able to do this. She says even though Donald Trump has ordered her to basically be fired, that she's going to show up for work anyway, and it does seem that her lawyers believe she has a case on this. She is going to be challenging President Donald Trump on this, and it's not even limited to her. Trump, pretty much across the board in the literal sense, is right now trying to remove and replace many of them. And again, part of this is around the battle for interest rates. Trump wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and they're not doing it. Now, look, in other news, President Donald Trump says his administration has been uncovering quote-unquote burn bags, information that was set to be destroyed but was not in time for them to find it. They're saying this is from the Biden administration. They're saying these burn bags allegedly contain information on the 2020 elections. Trump called on Tulsi Gabbard to comment on this finding. Let me show you what she said. Watch.
And you've also found many bags of information. I think they call them burn bags. They're supposed to be burned and they didn't get burned, having to do with how corrupt the 2020 election was. And when will that all come out?
Mr. President, I will be the first to brief you once we have that information collected. But you're right, we are finding documents literally tucked away in the back of safes in random offices in these bags and in other areas, which again speaks to the intent of those who are trying to hide the truth from the American people and trying to cover up the politicization that was led by people like John Brennan and James Clapper and others that have caused really immeasurable harm to the American people and to our country.
Great job. Thank you. We look forward to hearing.
Now, those are some pretty serious allegations. I would question if they had burn bags of evidence from 2020 that was set to be destroyed. If they wanted to destroy it, why did they keep it around for 4 years? Was that just lazy employees saying, I'll do it tomorrow? Or are these just allegations from Trump that, don't really stand? That's going to probably be a big debate. The argument over whether that was the intent. Was the intent to destroy evidence? Were these really quote-unquote burn bags? Why would you let them sit around for 4 years? On the Trump side, though, it's not going to be just limited to whether they wanted to destroy evidence. The big thing is going to be what was actually in that evidence. What was inside the bags? And are they actually bags, or are they just bins, burn bins maybe? We'll have to see what's in there, or, if it gets released to the public, we will see if that happens. Donald Trump is raising the question, though, of when this information is going to come out. We've been waiting a very long time, and the public has not yet been shown proper evidence on this. So maybe we'll see it, maybe we won't, but it does seem to be the case that he's taking this very seriously, and they are talking about releasing it. 2 more weeks, you tell me, we shall see. Look, in other news, though, among Elon Musk's initiatives is the Boring Company. Actually, Elon Musk came out kind of joking about this originally. He was tweeting about it back before he bought X. And he was saying he wanted to start a company called the Boring Company because he thought it was funny. What is the Boring Company? It's a company that does underground tunnels. Boring, underground, right? And among the projects right now they're working on is a network of underground tunnels designed to let drivers avoid traffic. If you don't want to sit in LA traffic, you can have your electric vehicle brought underground by an elevator and then drive very quickly through these little tunnels. Now, we've been hearing about this for years. Last month, though, the Boring Company announced that it's going to be building a 10-mile loop in Nashville, good old Tennessee, that will connect Nashville's downtown to its convention center to the area's airport. And 2 weeks ago, interestingly, the first big dig began. According to News Channel 5, quote, Aerial footage from Sky 5 shows a freshly dug pit near the base of the state capitol, a visible sign of progress on the Boring Company's controversial underground transportation project in Tennessee. The 10-foot deep, 20 by 20 foot test pit was dug this week to study the rock beneath downtown because, you know, you need to think about structural integrity. Are you going to build a bunch of tunnels and the whole city collapses into the tunnels? You probably don't want that. Do you want drivers in there and things cave in on them? You don't want that either. They need to see how sturdy the rock is. Now, it's part of the company's plan to eventually shuttle passengers between the airport and downtown in Teslas through twin tunnels, aiming for a 9-minute trip by 2027. And as just a bit of a refresher, Elon Musk actually did a test drive with CBS this morning back in December 2018. They've been working on it for a while, in other words. Let me show you what that vision looked like back in 2018. Watch.
You can go ahead, I think.
How fast is this?
This is still slow. We're only doing 28, 30 miles an hour.
Oh my God, oh my
we'll
God,
speed
oh
up
my God.
After we get around the corner.
This isn't just any tunnel.
We can get 100, no problem, but we'll take it easy for you.
It's Elon Musk tunnel. And to understand why we're speeding through it, you need to go back a couple of years when he decided he had had enough of Los Angeles traffic gridlock.
Either we try something new or we will be stuck in traffic hell for the rest of our lives. I started thinking, well, maybe this could be underground.
This is the underground network he envisions. Electric cars using street-level elevators to drop down into a series of tunnels. Autonomous technology in the cars ensure that they don't run into each other, despite going speeds over 125 miles an hour.
Tunnels are, in my view, the only solution to urban congestion because we have a 2D road network and we have buildings in 3D. And everyone wants to pile out of those buildings and into those buildings at the same time. Obviously, you're going to have a traffic jam.
So do you plan on riding around in the tunnels? Tell me about it. Would you feel okay? I mean, it's a bit of a different view, right? The scenery is a little different. Yeah, you could cut 10, 20 minutes off your drive, but do you want to stare at tunnel walls? Do you think you get car sick? Or would you rather ride outside and watch the birds and trees out the window and take that extra little bit? Tell me in the comments. What do you think about it? Now, look, I remember when Elon Musk first announced this, one of the main visions he had was underground tunnels for shipping. He wanted this to include self-driving vehicles, which could replace like semis and stuff like that, which is an interesting vision. In other words, not really made for your average drivers. Instead of having semis gumming up traffic, causing accidents and so on, you'd have automated semis underground. And that would be like super rapid delivery services. I mean, it's kind of an interesting vision. You would need to do it through very large areas, though. As many Americans know, an hour commute in the United States is kind of a normal commute. If you're in Europe, you might be horrified to hear that, because if your friend lives an hour away, you might never see them in Europe because people say it's too far. It's like the other side of the country. America is a very big country, and we have a lot of open, empty space. Is it plausible to have tunnels that long in order to, cut costs for shipping? I don't know. You tell me. Now, look, a problem I could see, though, with having people driving their cars in underground tunnels like this, and remember, these would only be available for, like, Teslas. You're not going to have people driving, like, their Honda Civics down there, probably. A problem I could see with tunnels like this would be how do police respond to accidents. It does not look like there's a lot of wiggle room in these tunnels. They look like they're pretty tight spaces. I'd assume they're going to have like a tow truck service or emergency response thing. What happens if a car battery explodes or catches fire, or even aside from the cars having problems, what if somebody has a heart attack? You know what I mean? There's a lot of issues that could happen in these tunnels. How do they deal with emergency services if you let people drive in them? How do you deal with car problems? It's a fair question to ask. We would assume they're going to have answers to these eventually, because if you're going to have people in there, you're going to have safety precautions in place, and we'll see how that works. The other possibility is they make it only for autonomous vehicles, which is, part of the original vision that Elon Musk had announced with them. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into discussion. Emotion 007, you're talking about what's happening in Europe right now. You said Europe has fallen. Communism has infiltrated the country. Sometimes I feel like communism never left Europe. And they're in a rough place. I'd say communism was kind of more in the bloodstream of Europe for a long time. They went straight from having kings, from living under a king who tells you everything you have to do, to living under dictators who tell you everything you have to do. The idea of dictatorship in Europe was always kind of just normal for them. Democracy, quote unquote, is a relatively new thing for most of Europe. I mean, you could argue ancient Rome and ancient Greece, it was a little different. But of course, they're more acclimated to a tyrannical government than Americans are. Americans are, I'd say, more like an anomaly when it comes to this. And poor Europe, think about it. They dealt with basically, kings, just authoritarian rule for most of their history, serfdom. They went straight from that into the late 1700s, 1800s of communist messaging and attempted revolutions. Because communism, of course, traces back pretty far. You could say technically French Revolution, right? Late 1700s was when things really popped off with the Committee of Public Safety and, of course, the Jacobins and things like that. But the messaging for it goes back even further. And so, they were dealing with this type of messaging all through Europe for a very long time. Even with the Enlightenment, quote unquote, that swept across Europe, the idea that you don't need religion anymore, that we can move beyond it. Who needs God? That was a big narrative in a lot of Europe. And the idea that human reason and human progress could replace the need for religion. These ideas have been thought about a lot more in Europe than they have in the United States. They become a lot more part of the culture of Europe. They went straight from that into the late 1700s with the French Revolution, leading into the 1800s, where you had communist organizations advocating for communist revolutions in the UK, in Germany, in Italy. They went straight from that into, literal fascism, Nazism, and communism in most of Europe. Most of Europe. One of those camps. And of course, leading into the Cold War and everything else in the whole 9 yards with that. And then into socialism, where after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, what happened? Most of those communist officials who were your Soviet leaders and your KGB operatives, they didn't die. They didn't go to jail. There was never like a proper trial for those people. They went into government. A lot of them went into the United Nations, in fact, or the European Union. And so the ideas of the Soviet Union, they merged effectively into European politics. And you see now where they're at. They are deeply, deeply socialist in most of the region. Even the conservatives there are not necessarily conservative by American standards. Really, conservatism in Europe is not defined by freedom as it is in the United States. Conservatism in Europe is more just like anti-mass migration, and that's really about it. They're not advocating for the type of freedom we have in the United States. They still want a relative tyrannical form of government, at least by American standards. America went down a very different avenue, although I do think, frankly, socialism is knocking at our door as well. America went down a very different avenue because we had a divergent movement to Europe. I would actually say that the 20th century can be defined by this, even going back further. The 20th century was defined by the divergent movements from the European Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, and the American Great Awakening, the religious revivals. While Europe distanced from God and distanced from tradition, America had the Great Revival. There was a bringing back of religion. In fact, the American Revolution, 1776, a lot of the founding fathers came from that movement. A lot of people point to Adam Smith, and they say the founding fathers were children of the Enlightenment. That was partially true, but most of them, although they were influenced by the Age of Enlightenment, they were much more influenced by the Great Awakening, the religious revival in the United States. The Black Robe Regiment was the main force of the American Revolution. And, it's a part of the history books just left out these days. It's left out of history books. And unfortunately, even when other countries study quote-unquote democracy, they're not studying even American democracy. They're studying French democracy, which is socialism. Because French democracy was the French Revolution, and then, of course, later on, the Paris Commune of, the Paris Commune that came later in the 1800s. And so, with these things, America has a very different culture, a very different idea of what government is than most of the world. And, while I do appreciate Europe, fantastic art, great food, in some ways more traditional than Americans. They actually have held on to a lot more traditional standards on family, a lot more traditional standards on food, on dining, a lot more traditional standards even on just kind of quality of life, to be honest. They have a more inherent leaning towards totalitarianism. I've seen it personally. I've seen it in Italy. I've seen it in France. I've seen it in the UK. I've seen it in Germany. They have what I like to call little tyrants. Little tyrants, which is if you have any individual given even a drop of authority, they exercise their authority to the greatest extent possible. Any individual given any drop of authority acts like they're starving for power. They're very not lenient. If you in America, if you walk into a restaurant and you have a table of 4 and there's 2 tables of 2, we don't think about it. We go and we push the tables together, we sit down because, I'm exercising my freedom. You do that in Europe, you're going to have a little tyrant and throw a hissy fit. They're going to throw an absolute fit. They're going to, glorified scream and cry that how dare you override my authority. You will experience the little tyrants of Europe if you dare overstep tiny boundaries. They're very strict there. There's something about it. I don't quite know what it is. I've tried thinking about why they're like this, and this is as far as I can understand it. One is, they're very rigid. You could say they're very conservative. On that point, I'll make a more light example of this. If you go to Italy and you order a Hawaiian pizza, okay, let's have fun. Go to Italy and say, "Hello there, waiter. Bring me your finest Hawaiian pizza. I want Canadian bacon and I want pineapple on that thing." The waiter, if they're nice, is going to walk away and say, "Okay," and they're not going to deliver you anything. You're going to sit there for hours. And when you ask finally, "Hey, where's my food?" you're going to say, "Oh, well, the waiter decided he doesn't want to serve you and he's ignoring you." That actually happened to one of my friends, by the way. He tried ordering a pizza at a fine dining restaurant in Italy, and the waiter brought out every dish except for his because they said, "You offended me and I'm just not going to serve you." They'll do that. The point is, if you go to Italy, they have definitions of pizza. There's no room for alterations. They're very rigid about it. You could say on one part it preserves their culture. You could say on another part they're a bit overly rigid. But I'd say, so part of it is conservatism, like an overabundance of it. They're a little too strict. Yes, it preserves their culture. It can be a bit too rigid, right? You need to have a balance of rigidity sometimes with leniency. The other side of it is I think they're starved for authority. When you live in a country where you've never been given authority, You lived under a king. The average person had no power, no authority. You went straight into communism. The average person had no power, no authority. When you give people a little bit of power, it's like giving water to a person dying of thirst. They've never experienced authority before. And it makes their hats a little too tight, so to speak, right? Cuts off the blood flow to the brain, some might say. And because they're starved for authority, they exercise it to the maximum extent. And so you do see that. I do think America, I do worry that we're heading in that direction too, though. I do worry we're heading in that direction too, where you do see kind of a leaning towards socialism. And I do believe that's knocking at our door just as badly right now. And I would say, to be fair as well, Europeans would criticize us for not maintaining our traditional culture as much. And they're right. They're right. I would remind everybody that socialism, communism, it's not just an issue of political power or like an economic theory. It's a movement away from traditional values in many ways. And in America, I'd say socialism, communism, it's more reflected in our culture. It's more reflected in the thinking. The real radical ideologies we have here, the real radical movements we have here, I would say are a boiling up of communism, socialism in our culture. And so, we have our problems too. I'm not saying it's just one side or the other, right? Another question, Vince B. You're saying, do you think National Guards that are being deployed are a good thing? You say, once the government oversteps, we can't get our rights back. One thing I always think about is this. Okay, look, you can always say whether you support something or not based on whether the guy you like is in power, right? Let's paint it the other way. Now, a lot of conservatives are more in support of Donald Trump deploying the National Guard, federalizing police, and so on. You could say that he's overriding the laws in very blue states. He's going for he's doing it basically right now in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., two very blue areas, very Democrat. He's overriding some of the very quote-unquote progressive forms of law enforcement in those two areas. Now, when the president is able to override the domestic forms of law enforcement, do you support it or do you not? Many conservatives right now support it. Many Democrats, they don't support it, right? I've seen polling numbers, and it's on Washington, D.C., it leans more in favor of Trump, but not by much. It's like 50-something%, right? Depending on which poll you're reading. So you could say it's still pretty divided, right? Still pretty divided. Although you could say Washington, D.C. is more Democrat, so maybe that's maybe the polls there are not quite reliable. Because you would have, based on just population and normal polling, more Democrats siding with Trump based on a 50-something% number. But would you support it if the other side of the aisle was doing it? If President Joe Biden had done the opposite, had done the same thing. If President Joe Biden federalized law enforcement, let's say in, you're talking about Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. What if he did it in Florida and Texas? And rather than putting in place a more conservative-leaning, interpretation of law enforcement, he put in place a more Democrat-leaning interpretation of law enforcement. Would you still support it? Would you be saying this is tyrannical? Would you be saying this is an overstepping of local authority? Would you say this is a violation of state rights, or would you support it? Right? Whenever I want to think of whether I'm being biased, that's the way I think about things. Okay, I think this is a good thing. Great, who would ever oppose this? I think, well, would I still support it or oppose it if the other side of the aisle was doing it? I can say personally, look, I try not to be biased. Obviously, I have my opinions, right? I try to be nonpartisan as much as possible. I have my biases. I will be honest with you about my biases. and I try to be lenient with my biases. But as a journalist, I'm still a human being and I have my opinions. I do try to keep this out of the main news segment, but if you want to know my opinion, I do lean more conservative, honestly. Not necessarily Republican. I'm registered non-politically affiliated, in fact. But I do lean more conservative. I can tell you, right now I more support, this type of federalized policing. I would not support it if the other side were doing it. And so on that point, do I support it? Maybe I shouldn't, being honest with myself, right? Maybe I shouldn't. Because I only would support it if it's in my own political interests. I wouldn't support it if it wasn't. And so bias aside, I would regard it as an overstepping of federal authority, being honest with myself, right? I can recognize, in other words, I can recognize the flaw in my own bias. I would only support it if it's in my own interest. And so on that point, maybe it is an overstepping of federal authority, to be frank. And this is me admitting that I'm probably wrong in my opinion, right? I do like the idea of, criminals and carjackers going to jail when seems they're not currently. But the idea of the federalization of law enforcement and overstepping of states being able to do that, it's a slippery slope, right? It's a slippery slope. And once you establish something, the other side can do it too. Once you normalize something, it doesn't go away. And so if they're establishing this as an acceptable, legal way of doing law enforcement, you might support it now, you might not in 4 to 8 years, right? And so you do have to be careful of what you allow. You do have to be careful of how things might be used in the opposite direction in the future. And so just because something is in your interest in the moment, you have to think of the long-term consequences sometimes, right? So it is a fair assessment. Ash from California is saying, I'm all for law and order, but I feel this is going closer to militarization of law enforcement. Yeah, exactly right. And taking away power from sheriff offices. But what does it matter if judges or DAs don't prosecute? Not sure if this is a good thing. Actually, I was thinking the same thing in Washington, D.C., because remember how a lot of this, at least it was going to happen regardless, but they wanted a trigger issue. The trigger issue was when, the guy's name was Big Balls. I can't remember his real name, but that's the name that sticks out. The former Doge employee who was beaten in Washington, D.C. I actually read more into it. They arrested 2 people, but apparently there was a larger group of people who beat him. The 2 people they arrested have already been let off the hook by the local court system. They're already let off the hook. And so you could say, great, on the conservative side, hey, Donald Trump is, arresting people. The local DAs and judges, they're still the same thing. They're still letting people off, right? And so is Trump, on that point, just creating, a more federalized law enforcement system without having the ability to actually prosecute people because they're not really able to address that side of it? I don't know. On the point of that, I did show you it was yesterday's, I believe, executive order, the day before, where Trump has put new measures in place. One of the things he's doing to get around that is he's putting more authority on the district attorney, right, Judge Jeanine Pirro, for that. And Trump is also putting in place more systems through the military. And it's getting closer to martial law. Now, you could also say, on Trump's side, that martial law is in fact a power given to the President of the United States when local government is not enforcing federal law. And you could say this is not Trump creating new interpretations of the Constitution. You could actually say that he's invoking the Constitution in response to violations of the Constitution, which is, again, when a state or state government is not enforcing federal law. I do believe that his investigations into whether they've been messing with crime statistics, especially with federal law, things like murders and so on, if they're relabeling murders as accidents, you could legally argue that they are not enforcing federal law, and because of that, you could actually make a constitutional argument for the deployment of the National Guard and for martial law, because you need to bring, we're America, right? We're not just some free-for-all where states can do just anything they want. That's why we don't have slavery anymore, by the way. They can't just do anything they want, right? But of course, where do you draw the line? It's a very delicate issue, right? S. Smith, 1352. You're saying you probably won't see this, Josh, but oh yeah, I did, right? But regarding your comment about reading most dystopian books, have you ever read Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson? I think you would find it interesting. I've never heard of that one, actually. I've never heard, so you're saying the book is Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. Yeah, I've never heard of it. Hey, actually on that point, look, a lot of you often ask me for book recommendations. How about this? What books do you recommend I read? Let's go the opposite way this time. What do you think I should read? Okay? I'm probably funny. I read a lot of like super old books. If you were, okay, so I have two, like, they've turned into basic libraries at this point because I've been collecting books for work for like the past 20 years. My office at work has a massive bookshelf behind it, mostly of like workbooks. So I read a lot of political books and stuff like that. At home, most of my books are like classics, and I'm talking like at least probably a couple hundred years old. Like I read a lot of books from 1800s and before that. So I have a lot of like old books. I read a lot of like old books. Do you have any recommendations for me? Old or new? Let me know in the chat. That said, everyone, happy Wednesday. All right, a lot going on right now. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, if you haven't yet checked it out, be sure to check out my new special feature. I look into all the food dyes. On that point, a lot of you have been asking me, will I look into the other food chemicals like natural flavors or artificial flavors and so on? I thought about it. I might. The problem I have facing the chemicals is you kind of need to go a few at a time because there's so many of them. And if I were to go through the entire MAHA report, like the Make America Healthy Again report, they're talking about like hundreds or even thousands of chemicals. And if I were to just talk about like 1,000 chemicals, I wouldn't be able to show you proper research on the individual side. I could show you big picture, but I couldn't minimize it and show you the real details. In my reporting, I tried to do a bit of both. Okay, like inside baseball with journalism, they have phrases for this. If you maximize an issue, you're talking about the big picture. If I were to maximize the issue of, for example, food chemicals, I'd talk about everything. I'd talk about food dyes. I'd talk about artificial sweeteners. I'd talk about sugar, processed sugar. I'd talk about preservatives. I'd talk about all the crazy chemicals in the artificial and natural flavors, because actually those contain a ton. Those contain tons of chemicals. That would be to maximize it. If I were to go the other way and quote unquote minimize it, that's more when you go like boots on the ground. That's when you talk to individuals about personal stories. And that's where you focus on maybe one or two examples and you look at those and really dig into just a couple pieces. In my reporting, I tried to do a bit of both, depending on what the story is. On the point of food chemicals, look, I'll be honest, I might, if you folks want me to do it, I'll do it. I was actually going to ask you all what you would like to see me look into. Currently, again, The feature I have now released is going to be the first of many. My Fridays now are dedicated to research, investigations, and so on for these features, which when we get enough of them are going to be, probably a whole new program in addition to Crossroads I'm going to do. For now, it's only on Epoch TV, though, so if you haven't watched it, be sure to watch it there. But my point is, I'm doing ongoing investigations. If you have things you want me to look into, whether it's research, whether it's interviews, whether it's on-the-ground reporting, even internationally. If you think I should travel to another country and look into something, if you think you want me to go back to Panama and the Darien Gap, you know what I mean? Let me know. I do have the ability to do this to an extent, to a decent extent, And if you all really want it, just tell me. So let me know. That said, everyone, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for another great episode. If you haven't yet, please do not forget to like this video. It's a very small thing, but it does really help us on the algorithm. That said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves. And as always, stay informed and stay free. Thank you. Despite being among the wealthiest countries on earth, despite our quality of life, Americans are among the least healthy people in the world. We've been told two very different narratives on the chemicals in our food.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days.
One of the issues at the forefront, artificial food colors. Certain food colorings, such as Red 40, which is present in widely consumed products, have been associated with behavioral issues in children, such as increased hyperactivity and symptoms consistent with ADHD. So with all these concerns, how are these dyes still allowed for use? What do we actually know about the effects of these artificial chemicals? Who are these qualified experts who generally recognize that these are okay for us to consume? Who has been making the assessment that these are generally recognized as safe? Something has led to a spike in health problems, and for some reason, it's impacting Americans much more than people in other countries. So what are we being exposed to that people in other countries are not?